night. Before I give my little introduction, we'll have Patrick Sheehan sing a little song. He'll tell us about the song, and then we'll continue on with the program.
Good evening. My name's Pat Sheehan. I live out in the town of Ulster. I know quite a few of you, and I've really had the honor of meeting Tibor and having long discussions with him. So I'm very excited to hear what he has to tell us about his history. I can't believe what I saw occur in my hometown on Wall Street in uptown Kingston after the Hamas attack. I never thought I would see that in my hometown. But I want to sing you a song. It's called The House I Live In. And it was written and performed in 1942 as a documentary by Frank Sinatra to show the world and to show the American people why we are fighting fascism. And that song today is just as important. So with your permission, I will sing that, but I'd like to sing it a cappella without the microphone, if that's okay.
Okay, go.
And this is probably I sing it at all my events, but to sing it in front of this group is really important to me. What is America to me? A name, a map, or a flag I see. A certain word, democracy. What is America to me? The house I live in, a plot of earth, a street, the grocer and the butcher, or the people that I meet, the children in the playground, the faces that I see, all races and religions. That's America to me. A place I work in, a worker at my side, a little town or city where my people lived and died. The howdy and the handshake, the air of feeling free, and the right to speak your mind out. That's America to me. The things I see about me, the big things and the small, the little corner newsstand or the house a mile tall, the wedding and the churchyard, the laughter and the tears, and the dream that's been a-growing for 250 years. The town I live in, the street, the house, the room, the pavement of the city, or a garden all in bloom, the church, the school, the courthouse, the million lights I see, but especially the people. That's America to me.
Wow, what a voice. All right, I'll try to keep it short because we have Tibor prepared a nice presentation. All right, so first of all, welcome again, ladies and gentlemen. We gather today to remember the 6 million Jews who perished during the Holocaust and to honor the survivors who emerged from the darkness with their faith and humanity intact. It is my privilege to introduce a very special survivor, a very special person, a man whose life story has become a beacon of resilience and hope. Tibor. Tibor is a noted engineer, scientist, and artist. He was born in Czechoslovakia, right? In 1929, Tibor is he's going to be celebrating soon his 95th birthday. Some langen Juden to many, many years ahead, with lots of health and happiness, and together with Nomi. And Tibor endured one of the most extreme conditions. Following his liberation, he began the challenging process of rebuilding his life, eventually becoming an accomplished artist and scientist. Through his powerful artwork, Tibor captures the atrocities that he witnessed, ensuring that these memories of those dark days are never forgotten, that future generations are reminded of the lessons we must carry forward. As we reflect on Tibor's journey, we turn to the teachings of the Lubavitcher Rebbe of blessed memory, Rabbi Menachem Mendel Schneerson, whose 30th yahrzeit will be in 2 weeks. The Rebbe himself lost a brother and a sister-in-law and brother-in-law during the war. And of course, all of us, or many of the Jewish people here have lost close ones during the war, starting with Tibor. And many of us have family that either survived or were killed or died, just starting with myself, right? Thank God my grandparents survived, but they lost their grandparents and many cousins and relatives. And the Rebbe, the Holocaust was very dear to him, the whole experience was very dear to him. The Rebbe nearly escaped. In 1941, the Rebbe escaped from France, one of the last boats out. And the Rebbe taught that our response to the unspeakable horrors of Hitler must be to live with even greater Jewish pride, faith, and commitment, to do exactly the opposite what Hitler tried to accomplish. He emphasized that our greatest revenge against those who tried to annihilate us is to foster Jewish life, education, and values, transforming our pain into a force of good. The Rebbe's message is especially important in today's world. The tragic events of October 7 and the rise of anti-Semitism reminds us that the fight against hatred and intolerance is far from over. It is more important than ever to stand as proud Jews, to deepen our commitment to Torah and mitzvahs, and to strengthen our connection to God. By doing so, we fortify our protection and resilience, drawing divine blessings and safeguarding our future. Our sages tell us that the Jewish nation is with all the enemies that we have, we're like a seh pizura, like a lamb that's between 70 wolves. And the only way in our survival is miraculous. So to continue this survival, and the way to strengthen our survival is by connecting to God through Torah and mitzvahs. The Rebbe also emphasized that the importance of moral conduct grounded in divine command is very important to ground our moral conduct in divine command. He taught that true morality must be based on the recognition of God as the ultimate authority. The Rebbe was a student at the Sorbonne University, and he said he can testify firsthand that the Germans were very, very, very logical, fine people. But if the moral and very moral people, but if morality is all based on the human mind, then when the human mind decides that they want to eradicate a certain nation because they're a cancer or whatever, God forbid, then that leads to one of the worst atrocities that we witnessed in our history. And we know that one of the seven Noahide, and that's why we have the 7 Noahide laws for all mankind, which according to the Jewish tradition, traditionally this was given to Moshe to give over to all the nations of the world, which is to not worship idols, to affirm our belief in the one God, not to curse God, not to murder, not to commit adultery, not to steal, not to eat the flesh of a living animal, prohibit cruelty to animals. And the 7th one is to establish courts of justice. These laws are considered by Jewish tradition to be the minimal moral duties required of all people and are seen as a basis for a moral and ethical society. As we listen to Tibor's story today, let us draw strength from his resilience and the Rebbe's teachings. Let us commit ourselves to living proudly as Jews, to increase our Torah study and mitzvahs observance, and advocating for a world that recognizes that Hashem's authority and to adhere to his moral laws. Our gathering today is not just a memorial for the past, but a pledge for the future, a future where Jewish life thrives and the values of compassion, justice, and divine morality prevails. Thank you, Tibor, for sharing your story with us and being a shining example of resilience and hope. Your life work are powerful testaments to the enduring strength of the Jewish spirit and the importance of living in accordance with faith and according to God's will. Ladies and gentlemen, let us welcome Tibor Spitz. I'll bring it.
I have a backache, that's why I'm going to sit down. As the stage is big enough, I can see you. And I will control the slides. I try to squeeze 95 years into roughly an hour, which means that you have to be very patient. I will try to really go fast. What happened?
You just do this instead of
This works.
try the next one? Okay.
Okay, I was lucky. I was 15 when it was over in 1945. That's why I'm only 95 in about 2 months. Imagine. Imagine that somebody who survived 25 years old would be 105. Who survived 35 years old, which was really an average age, would be 115. How many of those come here? I only complain about backache, which means that so far, so good. Baruch Hashem, correct. With diminishing eyewitnesses, it has a negative aspect. Number of Holocaust deniers multiply with diminishing survivors. And our enemies of Jewish people have been openly working on preparing the second Holocaust. The first one was not good enough. It killed only about 1/3 of the Jews in the world and about half of, a little bit more than half of European Jews. The state of Israel might change it, and we hope that it will. Europe looked, when I was born in 1929, in Czechoslovakia, Europe looked roughly like this. And Czechoslovakia only lasted 20 years, created in 1918 after the First World War. And you see Czechoslovakia in red. Slovakia is where the arrow is, on the right-hand side, in the east, and on the west, Czech lands. My question is, can you hear me always? Yes. Wonderful. Which means that I was born in very high mountains in Slovakia, very north. If you look at those two pictures, you see snow on the mountains in the back, but the river is flowing, and on the right-hand side, grass is still green, it looks like, which means that it was very high in the mountains and about 5,000 feet tall mountains. And the peaks snow on peaks could be watched all year long. There were competitions, snow competition in skiing in May, even sometimes even later. My ancestors lived in Europe for many centuries, perhaps even millennia, and we lived very normal lives. Those two paintings show really a peaceful time, a religious time. Czechoslovakia was as democratic as America, was eventually created by American President Wilson, and everything you have lived in peace and democracy was applied to Czechoslovakia. Not so in the neighboring country. There were pogroms in Poland, pogroms in Russia, nothing like that on the in Czechoslovakian territory. This shows my 5 grades of elementary school. That we called it town, where I was born, Dolny Kubin. The town was a county seat, but it had only 2,000 people, 2,000 inhabitants, only about 270 Jews, about 10-15% of the town. We called it town, but it would be called village in this country. And there were not enough Jewish kids for Cheder, which means that 40 to 60 kids, and in class I attended were 2 Jews. This picture shows our family in 1936, before the Holocaust, 4 years before the laws changed, and 6 years before they started slaughtering people because of their religion or the religion of their ancestors. On the right-hand side is my father. Next to him is my sister. In the middle, my mother. My brother is at the top. And I'm 7 years old on the left-hand side. Jews were a very tiny minority of the world population. In Slovakia, about 2%, but basically in the world, 0.2%. It means that if you look at Jews as an ethnic or religious group, 0.2% means at the moment about 60 million Jews to 8,000 million other people on this planet. It means 1 Jew to 500 others. It's very difficult for anybody who is not Jewish even meet a Jew. 1 of 500 is too many. The ratio is too high. Jewish religion is about 4,000 years old, and the rabbi already mentioned it. I add that Christianity and Islam is taking more than half of the world population, and Jews are absolutely a minuscule number of it. And if you open your radio or listen to BBC or any TV and so on, media, you hear a lot of noise, a lot of information about this tiny, tiny, tiny group. If you count Israelis, it's about half of it, it's 0.1%. It means that it's 1 Jew to 1,000 Israeli citizens, which are 20% of Arabs, by the way. Which means that this is just an introduction. I'm meeting a lot of people, and when I ask him how many Jews are in the world, some people say, no, about 400 million, 300 million, because of the noise you hear about this tiny group. Jews were such successful achievers for a long time, even if the minuscule numbers were the same. Churchill talked about Jews, or mentioned Jews as no thoughtful man can doubt the fact the Jews are beyond all question the most formidable and most remarkable race which has ever appeared in the world. Churchill didn't like Jews, but he held a Nobel Prize for Literature, and a very talented person, and he still had to say these words. Naturally, a Jew hater, an Austrian disregarded painter, or not really appreciated painter. Adolf Hitler, who later became leader of German political party, National Socialism, and is Nazi, didn't like it. Here is his book he wrote in 1925. On the left-hand side you see the original, on the right-hand side is an English translation I purchased to read it. That book really is a blueprint for the World War II, the Holocaust, and even the worldwide genocide, which I will explain later. I'm alive and lucky because my parents were chalutzim in Eretz Israel, pioneers in the land which that time was a mandate of British Empire. And when the book was issued, they read in German, they spoke German naturally. In 1925 they read it and they believed that it's a very dangerous person and something really terrible might happen to Jews in Europe. The prediction was right. In 1933 Hitler became Chancellor of Germany, something like a Prime Minister. I was 5 years old when Nuremberg laws, anti-Jewish Nuremberg laws were issued in Germany. There were about 8% of Nazis in Germany. 92% were regular citizens who were not really extraordinarily anti-Semitic or hostile to Jews or any other ethnic group or religion. That book was, those Nuremberg laws eventually prepared the world for this. Eliminating Jews, purpose for eliminating Jews was to proclaim German race as a master race and enslave the rest of the world population, not only specific nation. Purpose to murder Slavic people was to take their territories, starting with Poland and continue Russia, and replace their population with Germans. Colored and Oriental people were to be wiped out entirely. Simply white people, blue-eyed, was the ideal. Which means that Hitler eventually advocated to wipe out the most of the world population, and still, regardless of these intentions, Hitler was still considered an exaggerating, bluffing politician. Nobody could imagine such a mass destruction of human beings as advocated by this politician. German historian Paul Hilbert characterized Jewish history this way. It's a sentence which is shorter and shorter and shorter. You may not live amongst us as Jews. If you convert, it's okay. You may not live amongst us. If you leave or deported or expulsion and so on, it's okay. German Nazis shortened the sentence to "you may not live," and they advocated total murder of a religious and ethnic group. They called it final solution, and it would have been final solution. They were aware that it's not an easy task because so many empires vanished. Thousands of cultures disappeared from, like left a sculpture or a stone in museums, and we don't even know what they wrote or their languages and so on. And Jews somehow survived 4,000 years with practically not too many changes, a lot of losses and not too many changes. They knew that powerful propaganda didn't kill the Jews. Anti-Semitism, expulsion, forced conversion, inquisition, looting, murder, ghettos, pogroms, and all the other forms of restrictions and persecution. It didn't even discourage the Jews and didn't destroy them. That's why they knew they have to employ something more sophisticated. They employed hundreds of psychologists who made their PhDs on working on deceitful ways and methods and systems how to deceive this tiny ethnic group so that you could eventually wipe them out. They got their PhDs and they got their systems, and it started with something called Kristallnacht. Kristall means broken glass in German, and it started with breaking Jewish businesses, windows, burning hundreds of Jewish synagogues, and they arrested about 30,000 unsuspected Jewish civilians who didn't even know what's going on. They called it Kristallnacht. It happened in 1938, and it happened in two countries, in Germany and Austria. We in Czechoslovakia still felt safe because our government was democratic and it opposed, German expansion borders and rearranged the world, humankind by races, turned the Germans into master race. Nobody could even imagine how to do it. People looked alike, even Jews were blue-eyed and blonde. Reduce the rest of humankind into sterilizing slaves. This is what was the plan. They would not have children. They would just be slaves till they would die. In case of even the slightest opposition to their plans, the Jews were to be totally annihilated. This is what my mother repeated when she read Mein Kampf, and we as children listened to her warnings, saying this is dangerous. In 1934, Jewish refugees started crossing Europe, running in all directions. Nobody knew what would happen, wars or expulsions or simply military actions, political actions. And we as children were listening to the story. I was listening to those horror stories because there were always 20 people around our table talking about 10 languages at least. And all those stories really were horror stories. My innocent childhood ended up very quickly. I was about 5, 6, 7, and I already knew things a child never hears all life. Politically, it was even more dangerous because in England, which was opposing Nazism and Nazi ideology, was their politicians, pragmatic politicians. One was Chamberlain, Prime Minister, and he believed that Hitler could be bribed and it would somehow make peace. He gave Hitler Czechoslovak minorities speaking German, which is showing here on this map, the dark purple around what is now Czech Republic or Czechia is what behind the back of Czechoslovakia, France and England gave Hitler to appease him, and he was waving a piece of paper saying, I saved peace of Europe for 100 years. Naturally, encouraged Hitler dramatically. Slovak separatists made a fascist state, which is here in blue, and he took over the Czech part, which is in beige, and the world started really falling apart because this was aggressor was encouraged eventually to continue his aggression. Eventually, a lot of people in Europe, in West Europe, wanted Nazis to attack Soviet Union because they were scared of communism more than they were scared of a crazy guy who was killing Jews. Which means that this was the situation in 1939, 1940. We lived in Slovakia. Slovak separatists accepted the ideology of very grateful that Hitler gave them a country. It included, naturally, what they accepted, annihilation of the Jews. And a priest, anti-Semitic priest, Josef Tiso, became president of Slovak Fascist Republic. And this is where started practically what I'm going to tell you, what happened during the Holocaust, and how come it didn't happen to me. I'm still alive. Jews in Slovakia were trapped. This is again my painting showing a person between two beasts. Slovak government paid about $60, it was 500 Deutschmarks in German currency, for each deported person from Slovakia. Jews in Slovakia were totally confused. What took in Germany, gradual, many German Jews escaped, and not only Jews, but political opponents and all kinds of professionals and so on, escaped from Germany because they didn't like those Nazis who were rather violent group of street gangs. They liked those demonstrations, shouting slogans, throwing stones and so on, which means that the good, nice people, peaceful people didn't like the regime too much. But anyway, Slovaks were grateful. They issued about 270 anti-Jewish laws, defined with a Jew. A Jew was a person with 4 grandparents. Didn't matter too much that they converted in the meantime. And Jews were just a target for more or less annihilation, but it was not openly called that way. This is showing like a confusion. These is showing like demonstrations, fires and this and that. My school education ended at my age of 10. Slovak Jews lost their jobs, properties, legal and human rights, equality and freedom, their children the right to attend schools. This is the last class I attended. I was 10 years old, kicked out of school because according to the law, you were not allowed. My mother received a letter, your 3 children are not allowed to attend any public school because of racial laws. I remember my mother holding that letter. A mailman delivered, and she opened it and saying, "Dear children, it already started." My mother already knew that with that law, it started. We had to naturally very soon wear yellow stars. It was about 4 inches in diameter. In Slovakia, no text on it. In Czech lands, Jude. And who was involved in industry and was a little bit more important, had a half-size star, which is on the left. Little children, as you see on the corner, took it from internet. I put color on the stars. The children had to wear those stars too because they were Jewish and already, according to them, contaminated or whatever they call it. Propaganda bombarded the population. It was some kind of a re-education. Jews were looted, beaten, arrested, humiliated on the streets, and nobody would care. Police would turn the other way, and something which we sometimes hear or experience in Europe in the recent time. It's a different enemy, different Nazis, but it's the same ideology aimed targeting Jews. The word ignored persecution of the Jews, I already said that, and we became scared, restless, desperate. These are my paintings showing it. We, at that time, were ordered to make a school. Authorities, cities didn't want kids running around making mischief. Kids do that, which means that they ordered us to make a school. As I told you, 2,000 people, small town or village. They were only 24 kids between the age of 6-14. We fit into one room, and a picture of that school, you can see it was somehow preserved. Nobody was interested to steal it, which means that we found it after the war. This is how map of Europe looked in 1942. The German army was very successful. They took over Europe, east, west, north, south, part of the Soviet Union, stopped at Moscow and Stalingrad, and as you see in the south, they were already in North Africa. And the plan was to go from south from the Soviet Union and north from Africa, take over oil fields in Saudi Arabia, and this would be end of the war, because the West was getting their fuel, their gasoline from Saudi Arabia. And this was a plan which luckily didn't come true, and Germans eventually started losing the war in 1943. But in 1942, it was just very difficult to believe that they would not win the war, because they were winning all over, invincible, and they were really good propagandists, and every little child understood that. Slovak Jews were ordered to prepare for relocation to labor camps. They called it somewhere in the east. They said, "You people don't like you here, you don't have jobs, you are just unhappy here, hungry, freezing in wintertime," because they took from us all households, fur coats, jewelry, musical instruments. Every week we had to bring to police station something until we remained in empty apartments and houses. And the relocation was like a solution to that situation. As I already mentioned, the priest, Catholic priest, was a president of the country. Nobody believed that a priest would harm children and civilians and families, which means that he was a moral person. This is how he presented himself. And naturally, history has shown that it was a fatal mistake, and millions lost their lives in Slovakia. About 80,000 people lost their lives because they believed that, as this slide is showing, that reciprocity works. People expecting the hungry lion not to eat you because you didn't eat him is a very false belief. We were raised in believing in fairness, goodness, tolerance, compassion, counting on international solidarity, but nothing like that happened. There was no precedent of genocide. The word genocide eventually was created after the war. It was not even an expression, a language for just murder all people. In 1915, it was a real genocide, in a real sense of genocide. Turks, Muslim Turks, killed about 1 million, some people say 1.5 million, Armenian Christians. And it was a real, Mein Kampf, the book of Hitler, really mentioned it, saying nothing happened to Turks. They didn't pay for it. Nobody would really blame me or punish me for doing it to the Jews. And political opponents, naturally, Slavic people and so on. Gypsies, they were targeting Roma, which at that time were called Gypsies. Anyway, a few words about naivety of Jews. Some people didn't believe that those bad news are really bad news, and they could do it, they could technically do it, even if Germans were the best engineers and the best scientists. Also musicians, artists, and poets, and writers, and so on. It was a very advanced nation, a country. They didn't believe that they would be able to murder millions of people, because it was beyond any comprehension, beyond imagination. Which means that you see a boy playing with his train, and behind him is some beast which would in a second kill him. Which means that a lot of people were as naive as this boy playing with his train. Now, history has shown that there were many genocides, or many of those killings, like Cambodia, Burundi, and so on, Tutsis, Hutus. Anyway, there were many of those cases of attempt to wipe out an ethnic group or a nation or a religious group. This is how deportation of Slovak Jews looked. On the left-hand side you have a house which is graffiti saying Jew is our worst enemy. Naturally a fat guy, rich guy with big nose. But it didn't make any difference. Germans were complaining that Jews were speaking better German than Germans, and they infiltrating their culture and poisoning their blood and so on. Slovaks were blaming people, Jews, that they were not speaking enough Slovak, because it was Austrian-Hungarian monarchy for 300 years, and they spoke the official languages more often. Hungarian and German was the official language. Slovak came only in 1918, but I spoke Slovak perfectly. My parents and grandparents spoke Slovak with no problem. Anyway, the government promised relocation of people to labor camps where Jews would have their own government, management, and so on. And it was all orderly, all properties left behind, and what you see here on those pictures, a handbag was allowed to whatever you could carry in one hand. This was, first of all, 16 years old, then boys, military age, about 20, then adults, and then older people. You see here older people waiting with those stars. We lived in Slovakia, which is on this map in blue, next to Poland, which was large, much larger country, in green. And if you look closer, maybe this map is a little more details. It was about 50 miles from where we lived in northern Slovakia, across the border to Poland, to Auschwitz. It was called Oswiecim in Polish. Nobody really knew anything about Oswiecim because it was a village, as thousands of other villages. But somebody escaped from there, ended up in a local prison as smugglers. I went fishing at night, trying to catch fish in a tiny creek, ice floating around me, submerged in the water. I couldn't use hook and line. And I heard somebody talking from a window. I knew it was a little prison, one-room prison, through the bar. Boy, come here, I'll show you something. And I understood Polish and Yiddish in what they were talking. They probably believed the little boy, why would he go into ice-cold water coming from melted snow in the mountains if he could fish at daytime? They probably guessed, and they were right, that I was some kind of an illegal hiding something. Through the bars they were showing me a big gold coin, saying, if you get us out of here, we give you a fistful of those gold coins. Naturally, I rushed to my mother. She went to a person who was important because he ran a distillery of alcohol. Alcohol was like a hard currency in a very cold mountains, cold climate. And I returned to get more of those coins, and the guy bribed those people who were guarding prisoners. We opened the door for a few seconds. We led them at night into a house, into an apartment which was sealed already for auction of the contents, because it was an apartment of deported Jews. And my mother asked them, because some of them were from Belgium, and my mother was a teacher of French as well. And she was asking him, why did you escape? What did you do? Why did you cross the border? What was wrong in Poland? And they started telling, we were in a concentration camp. We were medical doctors. We were working on some poisons for bacteriological, for biological warfare. And people were coming, those transports, 1,000, 2,000 at a time, in a train, and they were asked to be disinfected, undressed, and they put them into showers, but the showers were eventually gas chambers. They were killed in 15 minutes, and the prisoners put the body into crematoria in 2 hours, next 1 or 2,000 people. And my mother saying, you don't have to tell us stories, we help you, we will help you to escape, we know the routes through mountains to Hungary. In Hungary, the deportations were 2 years later, and it was still safe to live there. We will show you, and they say, no, it's not a fairy tale, we don't want to, like mercy or your feeling of this is what, and my mother said, for good heavens, my parents, my sisters, all my relatives are there. And my father's 7 siblings, my cousins, everybody except grandfather who came to see us and stuck with us. Anyway, I was 12 years old when I understood that if we follow orders, we will just die, because it took them about 3 days to convince us that really genocide was happening, and they have been all mechanized and technically fit to murder, and they call it dispose of ashes of 10,000 to 20,000 people a day, but average was about 10,000 people a day. And that's why, if you count the time, it's about 6 million people within a year and a half, maybe. My material grandparents, aunts, uncles are on those pictures. My grandparents, I love them, I knew them. They died within a very short period of time, or immediately. This was a wedding picture in 1941. My mother is in extreme right. All people on the left, her parents, sisters, her husbands, all murdered, vanished without a trace. I have less pictures from my father's side, but grandmother died before, some heart disease. Grandfather survived with us. And my father had 7 siblings, all married, children, my cousins, none of them made it alive. This is again showing just the school. We were that school where we were 24 kids between the age of 6 to 14. Practically none of those who were deported survived. These were youth, older than 14, they were 16, 17, 18, 20. None of them returned after the war, made it. That time, the word genocide didn't exist, and to simply to not to believe in powerful Nazi propaganda, which did not admit any of it. It was just unknown phenomenon, and people did not believe it. But somehow it leaked through, and people started becoming desperate, and some people committed suicide. Now I tell you why our family was not deported, because my father was a chazan, he was a cantor, something like a rabbi, performing all those things which rabbis perform in North America or Canada. He was officiating at the Jewish funerals. They didn't want to, no other priest or in other religion would bury a person, or other religion applied to Protestant and Catholics as well, not only to Jews. So as they kept my father aside, in case a Jew died, if the huge district, he would officiate at the funerals. Mother was a designated teacher of the Jewish school before the kids, their parents and kids were deported. They were just under control in the school. My brother and I carried out manual cemetery work, digging the graves and preparing the caskets and all those things. And we were so-called useful, and we were told that when Jews would not live in our area anymore, we would be deported at the end of the year. However, I found in a book of a historian an order to deport us already in June, our names specifically, each by name, which means that they would have, if not a friend who contacted my mother, told her, "Don't be at home tomorrow, they will take you," you would not see me giving this lecture. Living in Slovakia for centuries, Jewish communities kept silently vanishing, and it was really silently because there were 2% roughly of the population, and if in a room are 100 people and 2 are missing, it was not really a big commotion or anything visible or drastic. We had only 3 alternatives: remain passive, walk into those cattle cars, be deported and vanish. Second was to revolt, refuse to walk into the cattle car, be shot, and it was the same result, to vanish. The third one, to try to survive against all odds and become witness of this crime. We as a family, my mother called us, should we take a poison or should we fight? We just voted to fight against all odds, against almost no chance to survive it, because in 1942 it was just whole Europe done, even Africa, and German Wehrmacht had a lot of friends all over the world already in South America and so on. Which means that the way out was how to survive. There were 3 ways. My brother, who was considered as a genius because his mind worked without something like you read about geniuses, said we don't have false papers, ID papers, pretending to be somebody else. First of all, we didn't have money to buy it. Secondly, everybody knew everybody. I was born there. 2,000 people knew each other from daily contacts. This was not an option for us to do. We couldn't fly, and even if we did, if we get some gliders, and some people did, it was a war, and they shot down anything anything flying because of war is a war. We couldn't live underwater, but my brother said we could live like in a forest, like wild animals. They live in a forest, under the snow, under the ground, and they have something to eat. They eat something the forest offers them, which means that this was the idea that my brother started designing or thinking of a shelter, how to build a shelter, how to camouflage it, how to get water, how to breathe, and how to just become invisible in a forest regardless, because we knew they would search for us. And this is what we decided, to hide in the mountains. When the front line came closer to Slovakia, and it became obvious that the Germans took over Slovakia. It was not anymore any bribery, any considering politicians who were 1943 started thinking twice, to be hanged after the war as war criminals and so on, which means that this is what happened, that we had the only choice to run into those mountains. I found an aerial photography of the area, and where the red arrow is, you see where we decided to build the shelter. You see the mountains, very dense forests. We constructed it this way. On the left-hand side, you see that yellow triangle. We removed the dirt from the side of the slope. In the forest, we found like three trunks, and crisscrossed them. We didn't have any nails or ropes or anything like that, because we just ran with backpacks on our back. On the left-hand side bottom, you see how we crisscrossed it, and then we moved that skeleton into that, what is here, yellow triangle, and camouflaged it, filled it with dirt, needles. We were high in the mountains, were pine trees. And we just believed that in a few weeks we will be out. We can be squeezed like that, 6 of us. Our grandfather was with us. And we waited, until Red Army, that's what Soviet Army was called, Red Army at the time, would take over Slovakia, because they were already in Poland and they were already in Ukraine, very close to Slovak border. Unfortunately, it took them 7 months to do that. They had to regroup and rearm and this and that. And we were in that hole for 7 months, and naturally we were missing on the list. Gestapo, secret police of Nazi secret police and SS were combing the forest. They didn't want to have any Jews witnessing and doing what I'm just doing now. And they wanted to find and kill us. And we had to spend in that hole 200 days and nights. Luckily, the snow came and covered the areas. This is how it looks in the fall, because in September we escaped in August, and in September it still looks roughly like this. These are from internet, pictures from internet. You see the snow on the top, but still green grass on the bottom. And then snow came in October, November, and even those SS or those Slovak soldiers, or even some because if somebody brought us dead or alive, they would pay big money to them, which means that some private citizens would participate in trying to find out Jews and give it to the German secret police. Then larger snow came, and really those horseback people combing the forest had a really hard time to find us. And we were somewhere underneath of the area looking like this under the snow. I'm not going to describe how we lived 200 days and nights, how we starved and how we lived on roots and leaves and needles and mushrooms and whatever vegetation grows on trees and in a deep forest. But it was really something beyond any human capability, because, as you know, mystical teaching in Woodstock, you know, those gurus and all kinds of people who spend 40 days fasting to get some hallucinations and some connections with some other dimensions. They spend usually 40 days. Even religious figures like Moses or Muhammad or Jesus spent 40 days and nights, and they would not be able to live after that. And you see a person who spent 200 days and nights. Naturally, it was not unnoticed, and when they were making a movie in Kingston called We Remember, Songs of Survivors, they took survivors and made a movie. A composer composed music to it. It was such a good performances of that music that that movie made out of that material was purchased by PBS, and PBS, as you know, has about 350 stations. Here it's at Channel 13. Broadcasting that movie all over America, Canada, and a lot of European countries purchased it. And you see me here in that movie drawing a picture and painting a picture of those hallucinations and conversations I had with some entities, because empty stomach, almost no blood circulating in the veins, something between death, life and death, something like hardly being alive or being dead and coming back again and so on. Which means that this is what that movie is showing, and a few samples of it I was showing you. We were found by partisans, Soviets sent parachutists into the same forest where we were hiding. They found us, they robbed us, they lined us up to be killed. I escaped naturally, I was very swift and strong. And when I came back to bury them, because they were shooting after me, they were in underwear, standing in snow 2 months before we were liberated. And this was the toughest part from the, few razor blade sizes, dimensions from death, sheer death. And they took everything which was in our shelter, blankets, food, even those berries we collected of frozen berries and mushrooms they didn't need, just to kill us by starvation. Took away upper clothing to freeze us, and they were shooting so that the Germans could have followed their footsteps and kill us. Luckily it started snowing, and we somehow miraculously survived that one. And a mineral sour stinking water erupted from the bottom, and we lived in that sulfur hydride environment for another 2 months and survived. I got tuberculosis after the war, but in 2 months it healed. These are my paintings showing how many people in a forest died in a forest by hiding. When they ran out of railroads, because the Russians and and allies were already too close to Germany. We had from one side, both sides. They started making sort of death marches. I painted this picture, and I became famous by it because it is in a book of an art historian who put my biography as a famous among people, very famous American artist, which I was really shocked, but it encouraged me to become an artist. In 1945, Red Army defeated the Germans. Hitler was dead, he committed suicide. Goebbels was dead, he committed suicide. And we were alive. We crawled out, weak, exhausted, sick, almost starved to death. And Red Army from one side and Allies from the other side ended World War II in Europe. I found all the, I don't know, American or British, probably American newspapers, Hitler dead. In Slovakia, the war ended in April 1945. In Germany, in May 1945. And Hitler promised his nations for them to become master race, rule the world for 1,000 years. His empire lasted only 12 years. 70 million dead people were victims of Second World War. 8 million Germans died, 6 million civilians, 2 million so-called soldiers, but you know, like most soldiers are also civilians in uniforms, recruited in uniforms, which means that it was a very bad experiment, terrible disaster. Here you see a soldier over German parliament, Reichstag, with a red flag. That time it was no red photography. Somebody painted it red, it was like a colored photograph. This is a picture of an American soldier, all smiling, turning Adolf Hitler Strasse, Adolf Hitler Street into Roosevelt Boulevard, which means that this was like a, after the war, very good mood. After the Holocaust, we still hoped that some people survived and would come. We were waiting. A lot of people who survived Holocaust as prisoners in concentration camps or escaped deportations as we did. But it was just confirmed what the worst nightmares and the worst news and the worst gossips or whatever it's called were confirmed. I made here some sculptures. A survivor told me it's a story and paintings how they celebrated Yom Kippur or something like that in a death camp, and how inhumane it was. Those gas chambers and crematoria confirmed the gas that it was used to murder those 1,000 people at the time in so-called showers, all confirmed. My grandparents, mother's parents, were taken to Opole. There were two concentration camps in Sobibor and Opole. It was a railroad leading to the forest. They had to dig out their own huge holes. They machine gunned them, or they had also a little house experimenting with gas, killing them with gas, and then they put some gasoline over them and burned everything, covered with dirt and grass and soiling, and this is how it looks. All after about 1.5 million people is a stone, which is like a memorial saying in this place, hundreds of thousands, 200, 300,000 people dead. Which means that in conclusion, 6 million people dead, 1.5 million children among them, This was one of my paintings. It was used probably 10 times in most European sources all over. Just reading the victim's name would take more than a decade. I really recalculated it, and if you spend about a minute or half a minute or a few seconds only, it would take a really huge amount of time just to read the names. After the wars, we couldn't forget it so easily, because 1940, 41, 42, 43, 44, 40, it was a long time gradual deprivation and then killing fields between my age of 10 to 15. This was my education. I didn't go to school. I was almost illiterate. Anyway, this is showing my carvings, faces in the shape of a flame, because this is how they were dying. After the war, they found Adolf Eichmann, who was captured from Argentina, taken to Israel and sentenced to death. They found his list of Jews to be murdered. There were 11 million Jews in Europe under German jurisdiction or military jurisdiction. They managed out of 11 million to kill 6 million, and I repeat, 1.5 million murdered Jewish children. Now they talk about 1, 2, 3 children. It's a big tragedy. 1.5 million, nobody can imagine such a number. I try to remember, my relatives took a huge canvas and painted them. This is what hopefully will one day will remain. These are carvings, Zachor, which is in Hebrew saying remember, long lines of people. This is what I saw. I've never been during the Nazi era in a concentration camp. After the war, I went there many times. We live close to Poland, and most of those camps were located in Poland. I give a lot of lectures to schools, about 20 a year, and a lot of them are high schools. And people that are there who don't know anything about religion too much. And I remind them, and they hate the Jews, and they believe that the Jews are not good, and this and that. Anti-Semitism exists and will exist. It doesn't need any Jews. There are countries where not a single Jew lives, and they still hate Jews. But if Jesus lived in Europe during the Nazi era, his mother, his parents, grandparents, his siblings, he had 7 siblings, his friends and neighbors all would have been taken to concentration camps and murdered. And it's really a bizarre thing that Holocaust happened in Christian countries, because Christians consider a Jew, Jesus, and his mother as divine, as God. And Nazis would have murdered Jesus ruthlessly, with great pleasure, and they had a lot of songs, even, like picking up on that, military songs. It's beyond comprehension that Holocaust happened in Christian countries. This is just a very small reminder to children who don't know that Jesus was Jewish. We had to relive the devastation, and I was painting pictures like that, people falling into the flames, but with a face on the right-hand side, you see a person coming out, and those symbols of Kabbalistic Sephirah holding him, and with face surviving the worst disasters which happened quite a few times in 4,000 years of Jewish history. I didn't receive any compensation for any of that 5 years of not going to school, suffering, my parents neither, because communist regime took over, took over Czechoslovakia. This is a document showing that I was a refugee, homeless and homeless, stateless refugee who was hiding in a forest and received a pair of shoes, bar of soap, and about $10 for food. This is what I have received out of that 5 years of suffering, because in communist regime they did not recognize that West German Wiedergutmachung was called, that compensation, some kind of a pension or a payment for suffering in concentration camps. Naturally, we went back to music. My father had a musical academy. That's why I became a cantor. We returned to musical instruments, we returned to music, we returned to ordinary life, education, returned to school, creativity, freedom, fantasy, music, art, hope, love. You see those paintings. It was my own style of painting, and even after painting Holocaust stuff, I started painting anything. This is showing to reassemble our shattered lives. We found a broken telephone booth, glass, and it was just nice symbolism with shattered glass and shattered life. I returned back to school. In a few years I graduated high school, and I had that, I don't know if it was a fortune or misfortune, I graduated with all straight A's, because a lot of kids didn't understand philosophy. Marxism, they had to already learn Marxism, and they were totally lost in it, and I was not, because I experienced it on my own skin, understood really what superpowers competing and this and that, which means I got straight A's in all subjects of high school graduation. And what happened was that Stalin understood that chemistry in Czechoslovakia was at a very high level. 600 years before was one of the first universities, the second eventually university in the world, 600 years in 1400s, with alchemists and so on, studying already something which was later called chemistry. And Stalin understood it, that in Czech lands he can get advantage in having better explosives, better weapons, better steel, and he can compete with the West, and if West attacks or he attacks the West, he will have an advantage. I was 160 people, graduates of high school, which had straight A's in their graduation, had to study chemistry. They sent us to Prague, and I became a chemical engineer with a PhD later on, an expert in glass science and glass manufacturing technology. I have chosen glass rather than explosives, and I was lucky that I got somehow into more peaceful products than military. Naturally, Czechoslovakia started persecuting Jews again, because Soviets invested a lot of money in Arab countries which attacked small Israel. In 1967 they lost the Six-Day War, and Jews became a suspect, to same religion or same nationality, same this and that. And it was a very dangerous state, or simply to be Jewish or to be an Israeli in a Soviet communist field. My father, and it was an atheist country, my father was a clergyman. which means that they got him, he didn't even live 60 years. And he went to a hospital with something really trivial and never came out. My brother was an artist, and very naive artist. I was in industry, I was technically better informed. I was warning him, but he was fighting for freedom of artistic expression. He started a magazine, he opened a gallery, like a museum for modern art, and so on, which means that secret police targeted him, installed a radioactive isotope into his desk. Two artists used the desk because they were irradiated through the stomach. My brother got ill and died 33 years old. But there are two books about him, monography, Ernest Spitz. On the left-hand side is a book, 1985. On the right-hand side, 2 years ago, published in Czech and Slovak, in two languages, English, and this book is available. I collaborated on it. There are paintings in it which I own, my brother made. Anyway, this is my father who couldn't take it, and my brother was wasted so badly. 2 years later, he died as well. I achieved the highest education, went to not only engineering, as I told you, a PhD, which was called differently in the Soviet educational system, but it was a few years even more valuable, longer, and more severe or more difficult than Western. And when I escaped from to the West, they recognized it with no problem. Here are my engineering. On the left-hand top of the side are magazines where I published and books where I published my scientific and technological articles. On the bottom, my mother sent me some of those patents I made, about a dozen of them. One of those very important patents where you could look at glass and know what mistake was made in the technological process. That little invention, optical device, eventually was sold by my bosses all over the world, because who would not use such a fast and quick and simple method of finding out what was wrong with in glass manufacturing. There were about 1,000 ways to do it wrong and about 5 ways to do it right, which means that then I was able to invent a device showing those 5 ways to do it right. And which one of those 1,000 made the product worthless. In 1967 in Czechoslovakia was a little milder political environment. It was a prime minister who tried to just make some economic concessions, and we had a wedding with Noemi in 1967. Naturally, it was a religious weddings were not only forbidden but totally worthless legally, which means that we had a legal wedding in Prague, City Hall, that time 900 years old. Now I usually joke, now it's 957 years old, City Hall. And we went to Bratislava, where we illegally, but semi-legally, because it was a milder regime which allowed those public religious wedding to show that they are not as bad and the West could invest in Czechoslovakia and so on. And on the bottom you see a religious wedding, a Jewish wedding in Bratislava, public, and it was a rarity. And then Soviet Union sent 500,000 soldiers to Czechoslovakia the following year, 1968, and it was for another 20 years totally illegal to do that. In 1968, in spring, I was told that in Cuba asked Czechoslovak government for help to send them a specialist for 3 years. They had 3 glass factories. For 3 years they couldn't make a product. It was a tropical country. They didn't have any bottles and a flat glass, car glass and so on, which means that they ran out of all kinds of specialists from Europe and even East European countries, which means that they decided to send a real specialist. And in 1968, in spring, I had to go there, and it was such a difficult problem that they gave me 2 years to go there, and who went longer than 6 months had to take his partner, wife or husband, mostly wives, and that's why now I meet my not even 1 year old, not even half a year old wife, we had to go with me into my next adventure. And actually we came to Cuba and they said, oh, compañeros, piso, they didn't know how to say Spitz. Compañeros, piso, 2 years is too long if you don't do it in 6 weeks. You know, they showed with a finger across the neck. And I spoke that language. Nazis taught me the language. Communists for 20 years taught me the language. In 6 weeks, first factory worked, and in a few weeks, all industry worked. And I went on living. That year, in August, I was supposed to go back to Czechoslovakia to report to my bosses. And we saw 500,000 Soviet soldiers, people, you know, very pessimistic and pissed off and angry and so on, which means that I decided I don't want to live in that country anymore. We were flying back to Cuba in a Cuban airplane from Prague to Havana with 2 stops to refuel. It was a Second World War piece of junk airplane, and when it landed in Canada, in Gander, we just ran away, outsmarted the pilots, outsmarted everybody, because we already were flying in and out twice, and I observed all those traps. And the 3rd flight, we managed to escape. They put us in jail. They didn't know we were Russian spies pretending to be 2 engineers from Czechoslovakia. This is my travel document because my passport was not valid. 3 months later, I accepted a job in Montreal. Then we moved 8 times. 9 years later, we moved to the United States, and this is where we became citizens already in newspapers, you know, like a curiosity. 30 years working in glass, making glass. I accepted the challenge. In Kingston was a company, National Micronetics, and they tried to make a part called magnetic recording head, which would read, write, and erase information on a magnetic surface. This was really a huge challenge. At that time, they were only those tapes and very early stage of development. I spent 40 years with a company. The company was purchased by South Koreans in the last 7 years, which means that our major customer was Samsung, but before it was Western Digital, Seagate, all those huge companies. making computers. We had 90% of the world market for magnetic recording head. They were originally only those floppy devices, very primitive, and that device which we were developing, magnetic recording, allowed to invent hard drives. When a hard drive was invented, then the computer industry took off. Why was it a special company and not IBM? IBM president said, computing, it's a device for accountant. Who needs another device for accountants? We are international business company. We are not going to serve some accountants to make jobs easier for them. But few people at IBM didn't believe that, it's such a, is it something, isn't it, which really is worth taking a challenge, taking a chance. And they hired me because they put, it's like a horseshoe, and it was a gap on the bottom of a horseshoe. The magnet, the electromagnet, very tiny under microscope. And they put epoxy in it or some plastic. And when they didn't know that the machine would heat up, computers need electricity and they heat up. And epoxy started dripping out of it. And they needed a person, trying to find a person in all world, not only America or Western hemisphere, to find a person who would put a millions of an inch size hot glass into magnetic ceramics without spoiling magnetism of that ceramics, which was a real challenge. And they found me in New Jersey, they hired me, and I remember they were showing me about 5 places, like a basement operations, very primitive, and they were showing me around to those 5 really funny enterprises. I came from fully automated industry, making 2 million bottles in a room smaller than this one is, and fully informed of all those controls and electronics and so on. And on the top of it, I knew I had a PhD and a lot of inventions in research of glass, which means we made it big. Hard drives came about, computers took off, Jobs and Gates became famous. Nobody knew about hardware people. Now in this room is a person who is writing a book about that. And anyway, I will go now very fast. You see,
My goodness.
now you will see the second half of my life. I retired at the age of 68 and became a full-time artist. Naturally, I had all the freedom to do it. In communist country, I couldn't do it. One of my first paintings was this, in angry face, and my biography between the year 1945 and 1985. And then paintings which related to Holocaust. This is ceramics painted on some greenware, sculptures on them, sculptures in ceramics. This is I had an exhibition in Prague, and it was an art historian who said that I continued in Impressionist development, which Picasso and Cubism cut short. And they called me, the American Slovak came to Prague to show us, continuation. Nobody did, and he made me like a historic figure, which means naturally I'm a short guy. I grew about 2 inches, and enjoyed very much that. These were the paintings I made after I believed that exhausted Holocaust subjects, all kinds of fantasies and all kinds of, I said, these are cut in stone. This was an exhibition in Bratislava. I was invited by the president who sponsored it. And in 2002, I had 35 paintings in the most prestigious gallery in Slovakia with American diplomats coming to see an American Slovak. This was a catalog published there. This was a catalog 5 years ago when I was 90. The place where I was born, 2,000 people, grew into a city of 20,000. And they made me an exhibition of my 35 paintings with a new catalog they issued. And they want to do it this year too at my 95, and I am sending them paintings. This was a book, an American artist in the Holocaust. It's a New Jersey, Rutgers University art historian who put my painting in a book with my biography, compared me to some geniuses. I felt even, like little tiny to see it. This is a Canadian publication with my paintings in it. This is a book we made with Noemi during the COVID era. Somebody sponsored it. The Canadians made a movie about a Slovak, outstanding Slovaks in the world. It is in Slovak language, made in Kingston, but with English subtitles. And it's available to see if you type in Spitz DVD 01 on YouTube. This is a movie I already mentioned, that documentary movie We Remember 2022. The speech I'm giving now, lectures I give it, I told you 20 times a year roughly. This was in Baruch College in Manhattan. This is in Holocaust, Genocide Studies, Art and Holocaust lecture. I had lectures about healing. This was a promotion of the movie with producers of that movie. Kingston City Hall gave us an appreciation certificate of honor because of those lectures. Okay, this is one of the last one. Anti-Semitism and Jew hatred continue, unfortunately. It is disappointing to realize that even in our times, its oldest and longest hatred is more growing than diminishing. And here on the left, naturally as a chemist, I modified a picture how ignorance and envy and fear produces eventually a blend of hatred. The world remains a dangerous place. Dictators don't like the Jews because we like peace and cooperation and fairness. You see the snake again eating the bird because the bird is not alert enough. Question, this is one of the last ones. Could the Holocaust happen again? Yes, Holocaust can happen again. And we have seen October 7 last year that they tried to instigate a mass murder, believing that neighboring countries would join and the whole world would start killing Jews, and they will wipe out Jews from Israel, 7 million, and then the rest of the world would join. Which means that if you don't fight for survival, if you don't fight against evil people who try to kill you, rob you, kill you, then you lose. And this is an experiment in strength, and I'm also alive because I believe that if you don't try to fight strength with strength, you lose. Which means that this is a reminder: Jews are only like a canary in the mine, first victims, but after the, they call it, after the people of Saturday comes people of Sunday. After Jews come Christians who are the next victims because they are infidels, and our religion is going to succeed the same way as Nazis said that they would be a master race of the universe. This is a reminder. Zachor means remember, Lotishkach means never forget, and we are not going to forget it. And if you have any questions, you can ask now and contact me. Shorten it as much as possible, and I never succeed. My apology. If you have any questions, please ask. And thank you for appreciating holding you to so long.
You're welcome to stay for questions with Tibor. Thank you all for joining us, and a special thank you to Tibor for this inspirational story, a story of courage and survival and growth. And I want to thank all our sponsors. Thank you for making this possible. Thank you for your support. We greatly appreciate it. And thank you, all of you, for joining us. Thank you.